So, so today's Fundraising Friday is all about unlocking mid and major donors. We're going to talk, that's going to be our primary focus. We're going to talk a little bit probably about small donors as well, just as part of the conversation, but we're going to really focus on mid and major donors. Before I jump in too far, I want to give a quick shout out to the Progressive Multiplier team. For folks who aren't familiar, these are the amazing people behind the scenes who make all of this possible. And I know Val is on. Val, do you want to just jump in and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Valeria Orval, and I'm the Senior Director of Learning and Impact here at Progressive Multiplier. And I'm so excited to be here in the training with Maria and with all of you. And yes, I'll be in the background in the chat if there's any questions or any technical issues.
Thanks so much. All right. No one else from PM is here, correct?
I don't believe so.
Awesome. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Um, cool. So for folks who are not familiar with PM, very quickly, I just wanted to talk about the vision and the mission of the organization. So our vision is a sustainable progressive movement with the scale and power to achieve justice, realize democracy, and restore the environment. Really, very basic, nothing too elaborate there. Just some basic democracy and justice work. Our mission, why we exist, is because we believe that money multiplied, we believe in money multiplied, knowledge democratized, and change amplified. We build progressive power by helping groups organize diverse financial capital and revolutionize how the movement invests in its own ability to sustain and scale. What that means is that we are here to help organizations really build their own work and build the financial resilience in order to be successful and to meet the moment. And I think now more than ever, that is so important. Really quickly, the other kind of housekeeping piece that I wanted to go over is talking about what is available to you all through the support of the Resilience Initiative. So obviously we have these fundraising Fridays. We have several coming up in the next couple of months. We also offer one-on-one fundraising coaching. So folks are able to sign up for up to 5 hours of individual coaching, consulting, or deliverable preparation. I know a lot of us feel like we are so slammed, we have no capacity to get things done. Let us help. And so past projects have included things like board fundraising training, annual development plan presentation, end of year campaign planning. One thing I would love for folks to think about is as you are going through this training, if at any point you're like, ooh, I want to dive in deeper on this, or I have some more questions on this that we didn't get to, that is a great usage of your 5 hours of coaching. All right, so now we're just gonna uh, do our last little bit of intro. So I've introduced you all to PM. I'm going to introduce myself, your trainer. My name is Maria Chijov. I use they and she pronouns. So I am a queer immigrant organizer based in Chicago. I was originally connected to Progressive Multiplier as a grantee when I was at Ultraviolet running program work there. I've also worked at MoveOn and a number of other progressive organizations. Um, I am based in Chicago, and my organizing is grounded in the idea of mobilizing people at scale to take collective action for liberation. And that's the perspective that I bring both to fundraising and to organizing. I really think it's about bringing people together to mobilize the resources that they have, whether that's financial resources, people power, or a combination of the two. And at the end of the day, my big why I do all this work is because I want to build a world where my wife and my kids are safe, valued, and allowed to live their fullest and most joyful lives. So that's why I do what I do. Um, all of that being said, let's jump into what we are doing today. So I'm just going to go through our learning objectives. We're going to try and do 4 things. And like I said, this is going to be pretty jam-packed. So if we're moving quickly, we've got a lot to cover. The first thing is I want to talk about giving trends and implications in the current political climate on donor behavior. We've gotten some questions actually before the training where folks are saying, what does this, how do we make sense of this moment? And how are donors making sense of this moment? So we're going to do that. We're also going to define a mid-level and a major donor and understand key parts of the donor life cycle. So if you're sitting here and you're like, I don't know what a mid-level donor is, we're going to talk about that. And then we're also going to establish individual giving levels and prospecting frameworks for our organizations and gain a deeper understanding of tools and resources that are available to support our work. We're also, on top of all this, hopefully going to build community with each other and really get to know other folks who are at a similar place as us in our work. And that is, in fact, what we are going to do right now. So in a moment, Val is going to put up a quiz. And the quiz is going to ask you how long, what is sort of your experience in terms of years in cultivating mid-level and major donors? So this is not asking how long you've been doing fundraising, but rather how long specifically you've done mid-level and major donor work. And if that's 0 years, that's great. That is totally fine. What we're going to then do is we're going to break up into groups based on our level of experience. In your group, we're going to briefly share your name, your pronouns, your organization and role, and then a challenge that you're facing when it comes to cultivating mid and major donors. It might be that you hear someone share a challenge that you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, me too. And I think that can feel really good. Or it might be that you hear a challenge and you're like, actually, we've kind of done some work around this and we have some ideas that I want to share. If that's the case, absolutely feel free to connect with that person. Ping them one-on-one in the chat and say, hey, let's talk. I have some ideas for you. Now, the key thing here is we're going to try and make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. So do try and be brief with your introduction. I know sometimes, especially when we're starting to get into conversation, we can get really chatty, which is awesome. But definitely try and make sure that everybody in your group has a chance to introduce themselves and share their challenge. So again, you are going to see a quiz pop up, select the appropriate answer, and that's going to put you into a breakout group.
And we're going to give folks a few seconds to fill it out. So Maria, I believe we should be able to see the results now.
Yep. I think we've got a couple folks. Yeah.
And I'll go ahead and start the breakout rooms.
Awesome. Val, just confirming where folks are able to hop into those rooms.
Yes, I see folks hopping in.
No worries, James. Go ahead. If you need to step away, that's totally fine. But yes, if folks want to jump in.
I know we have two. For the new folks, if you give us 1 second, we'll also um, invite y'all to the waiting rooms, the breakout room, sorry.
Awesome. And let's give folks about 10 minutes in these groups. I'm seeing the 3 to 4 year experience. Did you just put that person with the 1 to 2 year experience? Oh, and you are muted if you are answering me.
Yes, I was answering, you muted. Yes, I did. I moved her actually to 9+ because we only had 2 people there.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, brilliant.
And we had 8 people in the other ones, and I didn't have a chance to break those down a little bit further, unfortunately, but hopefully folks have a
Yeah,
chance.
let's give them 10 minutes. I think hopefully in those groups, folks will move quickly, and then the 9+ year group will have more time to talk.
Do you want to go into one of the rooms?
Yeah, I would love to. Actually, do you want to put me? I want to go into the brand new room and just hear what folks are talking about in there.
Yep, I'll go to the 9+.
Awesome. Awesome. We are just waiting for folks to come back. Welcome, welcome. I hope you met some new folks, maybe even heard something that resonated, someone else who is in a similar place as you. So now we're gonna jump in, and before we start really talking about the meat and potatoes of donor cultivation and all of that, I actually want to set the stage. And I heard one of the things that I heard in the breakout room where I was sort of eavesdropping is a lot of folks thinking about like this particular moment that we're in. And I will say when I saw this this post, it really spoke to me about this moment that we are in. I know that we are all kind of grappling with a lot that's coming our way. And so just, these are like headlines I literally grabbed from kind of articles that I've read in like the past week or so. Um, and, it's everything from the political kind of attacks, uncertainty on Capitol Hill, economic anxiety. I know many organizations are at a place where they're potentially facing cutbacks, either cutbacks in service, or potential layoffs. We're also hearing people, our donors, are feeling the economic anxiety and are more anxious about giving. And at the same time, so there's like all this sort of, there's all these challenges that we are all collectively looking at. And at the same time, there are some bright spots. 70 plus foundations doing their Meet the Moment pledge increase, which is on the one hand good, but on the other hand, feels like a drop in the bucket sometimes. And so I'm hearing a lot of folks talking about, we've relied on foundations in the past, or we've relied on government grants, and those are not available to us, or our foundation partners are not able to meet the need. And the thing that I really want to kind of highlight in this moment is it's not just like we as individuals are all kind of swimming through this and experiencing this, and our organizations are trying to figure out how to deal with it. And our donors are also swimming through this. And so the people that we are in conversation with are also seeing this. And so they might have questions about, okay, like, what does this mean for your organization? What does it mean for your, long-term stability and resilience? Where are you at? What does if I donate to your organization, is that going to like reflect somehow on me in a political context, especially those of us who do work that is more political in nature. So the way that I think about this moment is a moment of contradiction. There's good news and there's bad news. And I think a lot of times we can all very quickly rattle off all the things that are hard about this moment. But I think there are also things that are opportunities. So a couple of examples. Many of our organizations are under unprecedented financial and political strain, and our work is more needed than ever. Especially those of us who are working directly with communities are seeing demand for services increasing. One thing that we've also seen, even before kind of this moment of economic anxiety, is that average giving, individual giving, has been trending down. No, not like dramatically, but steadily over time. However, at the same time, this is one of my favorite stats in terms of like optimism for the future. Behind boomers, millennials are actually the second largest donors per household. So that means that millennials are stepping in and giving at a higher rate than Gen X, obviously higher rate than Gen Z. I think that's a really interesting thing for us to think about as fundraisers, both in terms of like this moment, but also what is the long-term cultivation of our relationship with millennial donors. Some of us are facing this challenge that some of our baby boomer donors and some of our older donors are maybe, aging, and we're starting to think about who are the next kind of donors. And I think there's an interesting thing there around millennial giving that is really interesting to think about. Another contradiction is that foundations have been slow and in some cases uneven in their work to meet this moment. We've seen many foundations trying to kind of increase their giving, but for many of us, that is not actually meeting the need. And at the same time, we are seeing individuals looking for what they can do in this moment. Folks are curious about and eager to have an answer for how to respond, and our organizations can provide that. I think at the top, the sort of the top line thing I would say here is that we're in a moment of great uncertainty and great opportunity. And I know sort of one question that we got before this training was, how are donors responding to the new administration in terms of funding levels, funding priorities, modalities, et cetera? And I can personally share some like anecdotes, but I would also love to kind of open up the floor in a moment for folks to share their own experiences. So one of the things that, I am hearing from folks is that we are seeing individual donors really zero in on what is your organization doing in this moment. I think for some folks, that's actually been a really positive development because their work feels so key in this moment. For other organizations, it's meant that we've had to do more explaining and more kind of storytelling about why in this moment, our work is really important. I think the other piece that we are hearing is folks are really experiencing foundations, like we said, kind of fluctuating. And we've also seen individuals either want to move more quickly than in the past because they feel the urgency of the moment, or pull back and really slow down because of the financial anxiety, because they don't feel like there's like a clear path forward. Again, that's just some anecdotes. So what I would love to do is actually open the floor for a moment for folks to share, how has the political and economic environment impacted your organization and your fundraising? What are you seeing? Maybe you are seeing that your giving numbers are trending down. That is a source of anxiety. Totally something I think that folks can relate to. Or maybe you're also seeing some major gifts coming in. So if folks want to like raise their hand, you can use the raise hand feature. And I would just love to hear from like a couple of folks of how you are experiencing this moment.
And feel free to just come off mute and talk, or raise your hand, or put it in the chat.
I'm happy to share a little bit. We've seen some shifts directly related to what's happening politically in the country. It's been kind of not quite the last year, but especially since inauguration, which is related to the nature of our work. We do corporate accountability, and a lot of our the corporations we push against are US based. And so we're seeing sort of a lack of confidence from some of our institutional funders in that strategy being as effective as it was before the sort of emboldenment that corporations are feeling under the new administration. And it's a direct impact that is pretty significant, and we're still in a process of strategizing because of that.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Other folks, I'd love to hear for just maybe like one or two more folks.
Susan Wolf in the chat said that is asking, have folks seen a retraction to cultural art organizations with more of an emphasis on health and human services?
That's a really great question, Susan.
Yeah, I just think we feel an extra burden, and we understand that, obviously, how the housing, health, immigration, all of these really critical issues are so much of a priority. And we're still just trying to find, well, where do we still fit in as a museum? that we can still resonate with donors. And I think right now, just with the whole political and economic climate right now, I think a lot of arts and cultural organizations might be struggling for some dollars.
Absolutely.
I'll hop in here. I work in one of those human service organizations. I work with a homeless shelter services here in California. And we have an event that we've been doing for 40 years, and it's a really well attended, and we have a lot of sponsors. And what we saw this year was about 25% of our long-term sponsors did not sponsor. And other ones, probably another 10% or so kind of gave less. And while we can't directly attribute it to the current administration or the current, it's somehow related. We don't know exactly why they chose to do that. What we see is they just are sort of regrouping and being very cautious, I think. And we have seen other people step up in this moment to support us, because we serve mostly a Latina population, many of who are here undocumented. And so we've had others who've stepped up to support us because of the administration, but it's not evening out. So that's where we're at.
Yep, for sure. That's great. Anyone else? I think those are some like really great examples, and just really showing, so much of how we are experiencing this moment is about kind of who is in our donor base, what is the breakdown of our donor base between foundation, government, grants, and individual donors, but also what are the issues and how does our issue relate to what is happening in it, both directly and also in people's minds, right? Like, how are people thinking about this, thinking about processing what's happening, making meaning? And one of the things that we'll talk about is how can we help people make meaning in a way that is relevant to our work. I think, Susan, you had a really great point about, as an cultural and arts organization, you are certainly facing cutbacks and attacks and all of that. And how do you make meaning of that for people where obviously like direct services feel really, really pressing as well? And how do we do that in a way that also like honors the rest of the environment that we're in? We never want to be in a place where we're saying, don't fund them, fund us, right? So how do we do that in a way that is actually bringing more folks to the table for everybody? Okay, so that's a little bit about this moment. Now let's get a little bit, I know we have folks who have kind of a wide range of experience. And for that, I want to do a little bit of level setting and just get some definitions out of the way so that when we're talking about all these things, we're talking about we're using the same thing to mean the same thing. Let's get this. All right, so I have a little quiz for you all. Who is a mid-level donor? There's 4 options. We're gonna just put the letter in the chat. So option A, donors who have given a one-time gift of $100 to $200. B, donors who are not particularly interesting. C, varies from organization to organization. Or D, a group of donors who do not have a high ROI or return on investment for cultivation. All right. Keep it coming. Yes. Seeing a lot of C's. Brilliant. I love it. Yes, it varies from organization to organization. And you might be here because you're like, cool, I know it varies from organization to organization, but how do I define that for my organization? Like, what does that mean for me? So again, just to make sure that we are all on the same page, when we talk about mid-level donors, in this context, we at Progressive Multiplier are talking about donors whose cumulative giving over time places them one tier down below your major donors within an organization's giving ladder. So we're going to talk about what a giving ladder is and what that looks like. But these are really the people who, if you think about your, we're going to get into sort of the pyramid analogy, but if you think about your giving ladder as an Oreo, this is the cream filling of your Oreo. And the thing that I really want to highlight here is the cumulative part. So if we look at donors as a snapshot in time and say, okay, this person has given us $100. That means that in our giving ladder, they are a grassroots donor. Great. However, if that person has given you $100 as a monthly donation over time, that giving may actually add up and move them up into that mid-level. So that's why it's really important to take a cumulative approach as opposed to a one-shot approach or a one sort of snapshot approach. Second thing I want to talk about is major donors. These are donors who give significant amounts of money to your organization. The thing to know is that amount is going to vary based on your organization. For some of us, our largest gift is going to be $10,000, and we're going to be like, that's amazing, and that is amazing. For some of us, our largest gift might be $100,000, or even some of us might be dealing with $1 million gifts. That's also amazing. The important thing is to really understand within the context of your organization, what is a major donor? And then the last piece is a principal donor. And I just wanted to highlight this because for some of us, we have kind of our major donor tier, and then we might have one or two folks who are like above and beyond, who are giving us high five, low six-figure gifts. And we think about those as kind of like mega major donors. In many ways, you're going to treat them similarly to your major donors. You're going to cultivate them. You're going to build relationships with them. But it is useful to kind of have that distinction in your head. So I mentioned, again, this idea of how to think about your donor structure. The donor pyramid is kind of how I learned. I think a lot of us learned this. At the bottom, you have your grassroots or small dollar donors. These are the folks who are giving $20, $5. There is the most of them, and they are individually giving the least amount. Collectively, however, this could be a really, depending on your organization, this could be a sizable portion of your budget. Then we have this squishy mid-level, and these are really the folks who I think oftentimes people struggle with, like, okay, well, what is a mid-level donor? What do I do with them? There's too many of them for many of us to like have a one-on-one conversation with all of them. But they feel different from our grassroots donors who we're sending emails to. How do we actually think about them? How do we treat them with, how do we cultivate them in a way that feels really meets them where they're at? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. And then at the top, you have your major donors. Again, folks who you are almost always having like a one-on-one relationship that you can get on the phone with, that you have lunch with. And we'll get into kind of actually breaking this down for your organization. There's kind of a formula that we use for how to determine this. So that is where we're at. Just a little bit about our major donor prospects. And I think there's a lot of folks that I heard who are like, we have a lot of foundation funding. We're just starting to get into this like major donor space, and we don't know where to find them. We don't know like who these folks are. So I think a lot of times for when folks are thinking about like major donors, we think about like the Oprahs and the Mackenzie Scotts, who are amazing. And if you can get that money, that's awesome. Like more power to you. But I think there are in our communities, in our geographic communities, there are mid and major donor prospects who are just like living their lives around us. I have done work with organizations that work with primarily low income individuals. And I think this question can be really tricky, right? Because when you're serving a lower income population, you say, okay, well, if our community is our members, we do not have millionaires in our membership base. But when we think about the place-based geography of where we're at, and who else is in our community, who is our organization in community with, that helps us expand a little bit in our thinking. Obviously, your major donor prospects are folks who care about your issue. It might be as a result of personal impact. They feel connected to it through a personal touch point. It might be because of their interest. It might be because they have volunteered with your organization. All of those touch points can kind of give you a sense of who these folks are. And then there's two things, those are kind of two things that are true about, I think, all major donor prospects. And then there's two things that are kind of variable, and I think are also important for us to keep in mind. The first is capacity. So we can look at our current donors and we can say, you know what, I have this person, they're giving me $100 a month. So that's, they've given $1,200 over the course of the year. They seem like a great prospect for an upgrade. I should reach out to them. It is possible that that is absolutely true. And for them, that $100 is like a drop in the bucket, and really you should be asking them for like $10,000. It is also possible that that person is deeply connected to your organization, feels your mission, and they are giving at the top of their capacity. So I think that is an important thing for us to think about when we are looking, especially at our existing donors, and we are evaluating capacity, to keep that in mind. And then the other piece about major donors is some of them want recognition. Some of them want you to say, so-and-so has given us a big grant. That's so wonderful. And some of them do not. And again, this is a piece that is something that as we develop our major donors, we find out more about them. One question that came up in the small breakout group that I was in was, okay, so where do we find these people? Like, how do we connect with them? The first thing I would say is looking at your existing donors and seeing who has had a long-term relationship with your organization. If you have a grassroots giving program, do you have a recurring donor who has given to you for the past, 3-4 years? Or do you have, if you don't have a recurring small donor program, do you have someone who's made multiple donations? Those are interesting prospects. Those folks who keep coming back to you are really interesting prospects. Another thing, again, depending on the size of your kind of small donor list, there are wealth screening services. So you can run your list through a wealth screen that can tell you, based on information that they have about the capacity to give of individuals. Folks who are already connected to you, either as donors or as volunteers, are always they are kind of your lowest hanging fruit. They're the folks who already have a relationship to you, and are the folks that you can go to with that ask. That being said, there are also folks who are in your network, but maybe one step removed. So your board has peer networks, right? So peer-to-peer referral, talking to your board members and saying, okay, who do you know that you can connect us with? Also, similarly for major donors, who do you know? You can give obviously you can give your capital, but you can also help us build our relationships with other folks. Professional networks, especially if you are working around medical issues, doctor and medical professional networks, or legal issues, lawyers, professional networks are interesting places to go to and to connect with, to build those relationships. Alumni groups, both alumni, if your work is connected to universities, obviously alumni groups there, but also if your organization runs a training program. I was just talking to a PM grantee who was telling me about how they have a chapter model, and someone who was in their in one of their college chapters was doing a fundraiser for them. They graduated 5 years ago, and they have come back to the organization because they really valued the resources that they received, and they were actually doing a fundraiser for them in New York, which is fantastic. Also, the local business and community leaders, folks who you are connected with. And then the last thing I'll say is special events, both your special events, but also special events of other organizations, other community groups, are places where you can meet people and have conversations, and have those networking connections. So then the next piece.
Maria, could I pop in for a second? We
Yes.
have a question of how do you know what donor data you need to be successful when you're doing a wealth screening?
That is a really great question. So it varies based on the tools. I will actually give you, if we go to the next slide. So we have a little tool spotlight of various resources. So in my experience, kind of the more data you have, the more likely you are to find, basically to get a data match. So yeah, so basically depending on what information you already have, most of us in our donor database will have like a name, an address, an email, that sort of information. That will then, you can work with these organizations, obviously for a fee. It's the one kind of downside here. But they will then run that through their database and create the match and return the information to you. Again, it's a little bit like kind of how it works is different based on different tools. I personally have worked with Wealth Engine. Again, not cheap, but also like you get back good information. Again, if you feel like that's something, if you have an inkling that this is something that you might, some information that might be useful for you, it is sometimes worth the investment. Other tools that folks have worked with include Donor Search, iWave, Windfall. These are all wealth screening adjacent services. And then Prospect Visual is actually more of a relationship mapping service. So they actually allow you to kind of visualize who is connected to who in kind of a relationship web. Again, these are all kind of paid services. If that is something that is in your budget, these are really great opportunities. I will also say, there is some, like, if you have some like intern capacity or some just like staff capacity, it is possible to do this sort of prospecting and evaluation on your own. It's not going to be as kind of as precise, but there are some touch points that you can think about. So the three things that we look at when we are evaluating donor prospects are affinity, capacity, and propensity. So affinity is like, is this person passionate about your organization or your cause? Obviously, first kind of tip off there is they are somehow connected to you. But you could also look at social media. You can look at, have they been quoted in articles about this issue? Have they engaged in it in some way? That's a way to evaluate affinity. Capacity, this is the one that feels the trickiest because obviously folks both have like revenue capacity, but then it's hard to know what are their kind of responsibilities. They might be supporting family members. They might be, putting kids through college, whatever. But for capacity, it is, you can get a sense based on giving history of like, okay, where would I put them? For some folks, publicly available data, if they are state employees, is an option. For some folks, you can look up, again, if we're talking about a higher net worth individual, there's some like, again, ballparks that we can find via research. And then propensity. Has this person given to a nonprofit cause before? So one example, I was actually talking to somebody the other day who does immigration work in Houston, and they were in the process of closing a donor, a major gift. And the way that they found this donor was they saw an article about their donation to the state level organization, the state level immigration hub. And they were like, oh, that's great. They're based in Houston. We're based in Houston. Let's actually reach out and have a conversation. And actually the state hub connected them. And this person said, okay, great. I want to give to you all as well. So again, propensity to give to you or propensity to give to other organizations, like-minded organizations. Okay, so we are going to now get into, so I would love for everybody, we're going to do a little activity together. I would love for everybody to pull out either a piece of paper. It's actually probably easiest to do on like actual like notebook paper. But if you want to do this on a computer, you can also do that. So we are going to try and build our organization's pyramid. So this is something that is, again, is something that your organization needs to align on. So this is not going to be like, we're going to sit here and you're going to build your pyramid and then you're done. This is something that is going to be a jumping off point for you to have internal conversations. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna do 3 things. So first, I would like everyone to think about, and if you have your donor database, you're welcome to like pull this up, but honestly, like top of mind, like what is your biggest gift? Many of us know this off the top of our heads. So first, write down, what is your organization's largest gift? What is the largest amount that anyone has ever donated to you? That's going to be the top of your pyramid, the tippy top. Then, what is the lowest amount that anyone has ever given to you? That's going to be kind of the base of your pyramid. It might be $5, it might be $2, it might be $1. And again, obviously, we are one thing that I'll say here is we are talking about monetary gifts. I know for many of us, there might also be like in-kind gifts or service gifts, which are really important. But here for this purpose, I really want you to think about like dollars in. So once we've done that, so we've basically defined the tippy top and the base of our pyramid. And now we're going to think about how we fill in that middle. So I would love, think about where you are at the very top and think about where you are at the very bottom. And then I want you to think about breaking that up into 5 or 6 groups. And those groups are going to be based on kind of a rough estimate of how you get from one step to the other in the most effective way. So what I mean by that is it might be that the majority of your donors are between $50 and $100. And that actually makes sense for that to be like the base of your pyramid. And then beyond that, you have fewer donors who are in that like 100 to 500 range. And then, you have even fewer donors who are 500 plus. That might make sense for you. Especially if if the top gift that you've ever gotten is somewhere in the 5,000 range, that might totally make sense. If instead you are an organization that has like a $500,000 gift at the top of your pyramid, then most likely your distribution is going to be greater. It might be that in that grassroots level, you're actually looking at maybe somewhere between $5 and $250. What's helpful here is to kind of distribute folks out and play around with those numbers. A rule of thumb that I have heard, and I think this is useful with some caveats, is that you want your major donor tier to be small enough that your team can realistically have lunch with all of those folks. So think about, we eat lunch once a day, there's 5 days in a week. How many people can you realistically touch in an in-person way? And then your mid-level, the rule of thumb that I've heard for this is how many people can you phone bank with like your full staff? So like if you did a night of phone banking, how many people could you reach? And then obviously your grassroots base of your pyramid, these are the folks that you are going to have kind of the lightest touch with. For many of us, that's email. And that, that allows that base of your pyramid to be pretty large. I'm going to give folks a couple of minutes to just kind of play around with those numbers. And then we're going to come back and we're going to dive into how we move folks through this pyramid. And if anyone has any like questions about how they're divvying things up, feel free to go off mute while we're doing a little bit of work together. I'm also curious, as folks are doing this, as folks are kind of thinking about the breakdowns in their in this donor pyramid. Are there any like aha moments that you're having? And a couple of things that I'll just say that might come up as you are doing this. One is you might find that your pyramid is like big at the bottom, relatively small at the top, and kind of empty in that middle tier. That is an interesting learning and an important learning, and an opportunity to think about, okay, can we cultivate some of our grassroots donors to give at a higher level? We're not going to get them to major donor necessarily, but can we try and start to fill in that middle level of our pyramid? Another thing that you might find is that your pyramid sort of has two levels and doesn't really have anyone at that top level. You're like, we really max out at $500, and that's like we have a number of people who give that, but that's like pretty much it. That's a moment where we can think about, one, are there folks who are giving to us who are just not giving to their full potential? Or two, are there folks who are outside of our kind of existing funnel that we need to bring in? And then I think the other thing that some of us might be experiencing is that you actually don't have that bottom tier. That's what's missing from the pyramid. And we actually had a great question about this that came in before the great question, Jessica. I'll get to it in 1 second. We had a really great question come in about folks wanting to know, what about list buys, list rentals, especially if you are starting from a place where you don't have much in that grassroots level, it can be really hard to build out the pyramid. Obviously, there are tools and resources for list buys. Civic Shout, Care2 are some of the folks who do this. There are also list share programs that if you are an organization that doesn't have the resources maybe to do a list buy right now, you could do list shares with like-minded organizations where, we'll send out one of your petitions to our list and you'll send out your petition to, so you sort of swap. Again, that necessitates you having some folks that you are able to share with another organization. Social media and event signups are also great places where we can drive folks into that email list. So that early email list building is definitely an important piece of this. So that's the quick thing that I'll say about building out that bottom tier. That could be a whole training in and of itself. So, and also something that just, again, something that would be great to talk to a coach during those 5 hours of coaching. Jessica has a really great question about the time frame that you should be using. The annoying answer to this is it depends. So thinking about your organization, for some of our organizations, there might have been a pretty major shift that happened 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago, that actually is going to make it so that it makes the most sense for you to look at your giving from that point forward. It might be that, you pivoted the focus of your program. For other organizations, it actually does make sense to look at the full length of your organizational lifetime. And oftentimes, one thing that I will say is this exercise also helps us look at our lapsed donors, especially folks who gave a lot to your organization and then maybe stopped at some point. Those are a really interesting prospect pool to kind of understand okay, what happened here. So again, it kind of depends on the lifetime of your organization, how you do this. The other thing that I'll say is that this pyramid is not you're not going to do this right now and then carve it on a stone tablet and put it up on your wall. It is a living, breathing thing. And hopefully, as you continue to develop your grassroots level and your mid-level and your major donors, and you're bringing in more and more money, these are going to shift, and hopefully they'll shift up. So that is another thing to think about. Also, as you develop more capacity within your organization, you might actually think about like breaking up that mid-level donor into like 2 different tiers. Again, if you are dealing with enough folks, where, you know, you might have your like, it's sort of like a junior board and senior board structure where you might have like your junior mid-level donors who get like some special stuff. And then you have like your folks who are like in the higher level of mid-level donors, but they're not quite major donors. That's all stuff that you can do as you continue through this process. It's not something that you have to do right out the gate. And that's the thing that's important about all of this is like, think of 1 or 2 things that you can do coming out of this training and do those. Don't try and do all the things at once. Okay, that was a lot. And hopefully folks have had some time to play around with this. This is something I highly encourage you to take back to your team, and do this exercise with your team. You might need to like bring them the data, but think about how would you slice and dice these different donor tiers, so that you think about who is in which level of relationship with our organization. Okay, where are we? Okay, so now we are going to talk about unlocking the donor life cycle. So we've talked about kind of our existing donors, and I like to think about the donor life cycle like dating. The donor life cycle is made up of 5 steps, and there's 2 bonus that we'll talk about in a little while. But those steps are identification, qualification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. And the way that I think about this as dating is as follows. So identification is when you're just starting out. Let's say you just moved to a new city and you're going on the dating apps and you're like, who's out there? Like who's interesting? Who seems like maybe they would be someone that I want to get to know? Qualification is when you are you click on someone's profile and you're like, oh, they also like dogs and they seem progressive and share my values. Let me swipe right. So you've kind of looked at them. They seem like they're a match. You've said, okay, we're interested. Maybe this will lead somewhere. Cultivation is when you're texting with the person. You're like talking and you're trying to get to know them and you're learning what they're into and you're sharing what you're into. If that goes well, you move to like an in-person date, which would be the solicitation stage. And then if the date goes well, you want to continue building the relationship. You want to engage in stewardship of that relationship, which might mean going on more dates, buying the person flowers, doing fun activities together. So that's kind of that's the quick snapshot. We're going to dig into each of these and think about how a mid-level donor and a major donor experiences each of these phases. So identification. This is the place where you identify a potential donor or a potential donor identifies you. And I think that second piece is really important because just as much as we are looking for donors, especially in this moment, there are people who are looking for what can I do? Who can I get involved with? And that is a really great opportunity for us. So this is the place where you really want to engage in research, and an activity that I think will be really helpful, and we'll share this. I believe we have this tool that we can share out with folks, is creating a donor profile. So a donor profile is almost like a snapshot of your ideal donor. What do they care about? Who are they? Who are you looking for? This can really help you to zero in on who those folks are who are worth cultivating and who are worth swiping right on in the dating analogy, in order to build relationships with. If, for the mid-level donors, the activity that we were just doing where we were defining our tiers is actually a really great starting point for identification, actually for both mid-level and major donors. Really understanding who is already in our pyramid, who is already in community with us, is a place where you can start. then you can go back to that slide that we had talking about where can we find major donor prospects? Who are these folks that we can be cultivating? And then also thinking about the folks who are already in our pipeline, can we actually be upgrading them and cultivating them to give at a higher rate? And one thing that's really important at this point is to really showcase your work and to do it in far and wide. Thinking about things like social media, events, really make sure that folks are seeing your impact. They're seeing the stories and videos and photos of your work. And maybe also giving them opportunities to connect in small ways. That might be in small donations. It might be as a volunteer. And also making sure that the door is always open for conversation. If someone comes to you and is like, I'm thinking about my will and I am really interested in the work that you've been doing. I've been donating to you for a while. I'd love to talk about, planned giving options. You want that person to get on the phone with someone and not have to go through, a big rigmarole of like emailing info at and getting tossed around by a bunch of people. You really want to have that direct communication. Next is qualification. This is where we are assessing the capacity and willingness of potential donors to give at a higher level. Again, this is where we refer back to our donor pyramid, and we think about evaluating how we're evaluating our prospects. If you have time, having conversations with folks, even if it's kind of with a smattering of folks to get a sense of who is already in your donor pool is great. If not, though, a combination of research and your donor template that we just talked about can really help you narrow in and using your best judgment. And then the thing that I will say is really important at this stage is making sure that you have a clear way of gathering and tracking information. That might look like a contact relationship management database. It could also, honestly, like if you are just starting out, a spreadsheet is fine as long as it is something that is being updated and managed. Because any data source you have is only as good as the updating that goes into it. Next, we've got cultivation. This is where we are fostering a relationship with our donor prospect. If we're talking about a major donor where we are having more of that one-on-one relationship, this is where we email them, call them, schedule an in-person meeting. If you have a physical space, invite that donor to come in and tour the space, maybe meet some of the folks who work in your program. For your mid-level donors, this could look like creating a special program that, they're identified as members of the insert really cute name for the mid-level donors at your organization. And maybe they get a special newsletter or special update, or maybe they get invited to special events. And one of the things that I think sometimes we worry about is that, I don't want to treat someone better because they are giving us more money. I don't want, my anti-capitalist values are really going to balk at that. But the way that I like to think about it is it's about the relationship level that that person has with you. Just like you would not, like if you have an acquaintance that you know from work, you probably are not going to buy them a diamond necklace for their birthday. That's just not what that relationship is. However, your partner, you will go out of your way for them, and your family members, you will do more in that relationship. And so when we think about, our major donors, they are in that closest circle of relationship with us. They are in that place. Folks who are more at the grassroots giving level many of them might be invested in this work, but they're not, their expectation of our relationship is going to be different. And a really important thing to remember at this stage is that this stage is a two-way street. So this is about the person learning about your organization, but also it's so important for us to be listening and taking notes. This is where, someone says, hey, I really love fly fishing. I went on this great fly fishing trip. And if you are an environmental organization, this is when you send them a follow-up article being like, oh, I remembered you mentioned fly fishing. Here's actually how our work is making it so that, fishing is better in our area. I know very little about fly fishing, but the point being, connecting your work to their interests is a really great way to deepen that relationship and also make someone feel like, oh, they're really listening to me. They really care about what I care about. And one thing to note here is that I am a huge fan of repurposing content. So if you have an annual report that had a profile of one of your volunteers who maybe is doing work that is similar to what this donor is passionate about, cut that out, send it to them, repurpose content that exists. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. So that's cultivation. Then we get to our solicitation. This is where you make the ask. This is where you like invite them on a date. For major donors, most of the time you want this to be a face-to-face conversation. For mid-level donors, it doesn't, if you can do it as a face-to-face, that's great. If not, having an email coming from a high-level person, like from your ED, that really feels special, is a really good way to do this. For your major donors, and honestly also for your mid-level donors, if you are, again, asking them to share information back with you through surveys, you should know about this person and be able to tailor the pitch to them. It's also really important to come prepared to this meeting with both answers about like the program and also answers about like the practical aspects of like, okay, how can I give to you? What are your financials like? Things like that, where folks might get into more of the brass tacks. And this is not as much about like, what is my impact going to be? Hopefully by now they know because you've done the cultivation. This is going to be more about the like practicalities of the day-to-day work. And last but not least, we're getting into stewardship. This is where we are facilitating that relationship. As soon as that money hits our account, we are sending a thank you note. Bonus points if it's handwritten and it somehow talks about the impact of their work. This is also where we are, sorry, went backwards. This is also where we're sending them regular updates. And I think this came up in one of the small groups, but there is, you'll find that there are some folks who like want to write a check and they're like, great, I'm done. Cool, thanks. And then there's some people who are going to be like, they wrote you a check and then they're going to send you like 10 follow-up emails of like, hey, have you thought about this? What about this? So it's really, again, we are all individuals and our degree of engagement is going to vary. And so it's really important for us to track that as part of what we know about our donors. And then the last thing that I'll say is there are 2 bonus steps here. Retention, which is things like remembering their birthday, remembering their, giving anniversary, really making sure that they are feeling connected to your work. And then upgrade. I know marriage is not for everyone, but that was, again, in this dating metaphor. This is where you are moving that person up the giving ladder. So maybe they gave you 10,000, but you really know that they have the capacity to give more. Thinking about how do you get into that conversation with them? How do you show them that the money that they gave was put to good use and can be even more useful in the future? So that is our donor life cycle. So I'm going to just very quickly now do a recap and we're going to do a little exit ticket for folks. So again, just to recap, we wanted to understand giving trends and implications on donor behavior. And I think we had some really good insight from the group there. We also wanted to define mid-level and major donors and understand the donor life cycle. Wanted to establish individual giving levels and prospecting frameworks for organizations. And then we also wanted to share some tools. Really quickly, we're gonna go through a couple of exit ticket questions, and then I see a really good question in the chat that I would love to get to in a moment. All right, first question. Second to baby boomers, blank are the generation with the highest average giving per household. Folks, remember, we talked about this earlier. Yeah, excellent. I'm seeing millennials is correct. Well done, folks. Again, really interesting potential for cultivation, both now and in the long term. Which of these is not part of the process for evaluating a donor prospect? One, or A, affinity, B, acuity, C, capacity, and D, propensity. All right, I'm seeing a couple more folks jump in. Yes, excellent. Honestly, I put that in because it sounded similar, but did not trick you all. Excellent. All right. Can someone name the 5 steps of the donor life cycle? Or even if you want to just shout out or type out 1 or 2 and see if we can get to 5 together. Identification, yes. Other folks want to jump in with other steps? Qualification, stewardship, yeah. We've got 3, we've got 2 more. Upgrade, hold on to upgrade, Alyssa. We'll get to that. So we have identification, qualification. How do we build relationships with folks? Solicitation, yes. Before we get to solicitation, cultivation, yes. Well done. So identification, qualification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. Now, Alyssa, I'm going to come back to you. What are the 2 bonus steps that we talked about? One of them is upgrade. Do folks remember the other one? We talked about this is sort of how we maintain our relationship by doing things like remembering their birthday, remembering their first donor date. Kind of falls under stewardship. All right, I'm going to jump in and give you this one. This is a little tricky. So retention. Retention falls under stewardship, but I like to think of it as just kind of what are our touch points for making sure that that person feels connected to our organization and continues to give. How are we ensuring gift number 2, gift number 3, etc. All right, y'all did great. A+, love it. So I would love for folks to take a moment right now in the chat and share 2 things that you are taking away from this time together. What did you learn, if there was something that you learned, or what's an aha moment that you had that you're like, oh, I didn't think about doing this, or what's something that you're going to take back to your team? Are you going to do the donor ladder activity with your team? Would love for folks to jump in and share that in the chat. And I am going to go back to Tanya's question and read that. All right. While folks are putting their learnings in the chat, I'm going to look at this really great question from Danya, which is, do you have any advice for gift officers that are having trouble securing meetings and touch points with existing partners and candidates for upgrade? It can sometimes feel like we're pulling teeth, and I wonder if there's a better approach that we aren't considering. So I think this is a really great question. And I'm going to focus on the existing partners and candidates for upgrade piece, because I think that the benefit that you have is that you know kind of the most information about those folks. And so one piece of advice that I would offer is going back and looking at like, what have they responded to? What information do we already know from our previous cultivation that we can use to kind of bring them back? So is it that, they have given, the last time they gave was after a really big event that they attended? Is there an event coming up that we can invite them to? What is the thing that is going to like kind of pull them back in and into conversation? The other thing to think about is, are we really showing them the impact of what their money is allowing us to do? And honestly, like I will say the other thing that I've seen work sometimes is just saying, hey, we haven't connected in a while, and I want to just like hear your feedback on how things are going, how our work is going. Do you want to share your thoughts? Oftentimes people love being asked for their opinion. I would also love to hear if folks want to come off mute, if there is anything that's worked for you in the past on this question of how do we secure meetings and touch points with existing partners? Anybody wants to jump in with some thoughts? Val, do you want to jump in too with any thoughts that you have?
Yeah, no, I think like it's a really good question. And I think the first tier always for me is, are we being consistent in our follow-up? Like, did we do our, after a week, sent a, hey, bumping this up, after like that, another 2 weeks, hey, bump it, like doing at least 3 bumps before you're saying, these folks are not responding to me. It takes sometimes that long just to get the first response. So if they're not responding after the first or second bump, honestly, do not despair. Like after maybe the third, that's when, okay, maybe this is not working. And especially if it's a warm prospect, like someone you've engaged with before, an existing donor, I echo what you were saying, Maria, about make sure that your communications are actually resonating with your donors. If they're not responding and they in the past have responded, is there something about your messaging that is not clicking or not resonating? I know some of the experiments some of our grantees have done in the past have been around messaging, and the assumptions that they had of what people would connect with actually did not match the messaging that people were actually looking for. So sometimes it's taking another look at how you're communicating with folks and making sure your assumptions are correct.
Yeah, I think those are really great. Thanks so much, Val. And I will also say I had a supervisor who really imparted into me this idea of like loving the nudge. I think sometimes we feel like, by the third email, we're like, wow, I'm being so annoying. But honestly, like it usually like the number of times my friends have to text me to remind me when I'm like in a really busy moment, or if they catch me when I'm, trying to take care of my kids and have a lot of stuff going on. Like I know that's true for me in my personal life. And again, our donors are people just like us. They have so many things going on. They might have been on vacation the first time your email came in, and they might have been preparing for a big meeting during the second email. So really like recognize like it's not you necessarily. Um, yeah. And yeah, it's part of how you maintain that relationship. Obviously, don't be rude, but I don't think any of us are. But being kind in that nudge and just acknowledging like, hey, I'm sure you're busy. I would love to just like, get 15 minutes of your time to connect. Or we could do it over email or, whatever makes sense.
Embrace the annoying and the awkward.
Yes, absolutely. And also, you are always 10 times more awkward in your head than you actually are. I think that's the other like good rule of thumb. Val is going to put a survey in the chat. Please, 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 if you have a moment, fill it out. It's really going to be super helpful to us to get feedback and to improve these trainings. I can stick around for a little bit longer if folks have any other questions that they either want to like speak into the group or put into the chat. We can talk more. But I really appreciated getting to chat with you all. And yeah, let me know if there's any other questions. Thank you, Alyssa. I'm so glad.